Right. Well, Immigration Nation. This is Mark Holthe, Canadian immigration lawyer. And this is probably one of the funner things that I get to do because not only is it me just blithering on talking, but I get in to go. All right. I guess I didn't anticipate that catching up to me so quick. I guess I set up that scene a little bit different. But anyways, yes, Canadian, this is Immigration Nation. And the reason I like this so much is because I get to invite in people that are smarter than me to share insight on aspects of immigration that are super beneficial for the people who watch the Canadian Immigration Institute in all its forms. But this is where I get to showcase the awesome immigration lawyers across the country who are doing things the right way. And as you've seen from the title, those of you who are now starting to pile in a little bit here with the live video, you will see that this title of our live Immigration Nation today is one that is of great importance to anyone who is looking at coming to Canada as an international student or someone that's here. This is stuff you just have to know. So let's start off by welcoming my guest, Will Tao. Will, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm happy to be here, excited. I love every conversation with you. So this one's going to be amazing, I know.
Excellent. So I've had Will on my Canadian immigration podcast as well in the past, and I couldn't resist bringing him on. He's one of the young up and coming lawyers, immigration lawyers in our bar here across the country, and he's just doing a ton of really, really cool things. The work he's doing for international students is just one thing, but he's very, very versatile. He's done a ton of different things, litigation, the application side of immigration, and he's got really a well-rounded practice. And just recently, Will, you started your own firm. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we are Heron Law Offices. We started in February of this year, so we're a month and a few days old. Now 2 lawyers and 1 case manager. And exciting. We're thinking about doing law differently. I know, Mark, you've been doing that and really changing the game. We hope to do the same thing. We're looking at the overlap between Indigenous and immigration law as one of our future pathways. And we're looking at ways that we can help our marginalized, racialized, and vulnerable clients. So it's really great to bring together a values-driven firm, and that's what we're doing.
Very cool. Thank you for doing this, Will. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for taking time. I know what it's like starting a firm from scratch, and I can tell you time is something that's not, there's not a lot of time to go around when you're trying to figure out all of the back office stuff, starting a new firm, as well as, doing the outreach, the business development, the stuff that you do giving back to the community, and these live streams. And so those of you who are watching today, the topic that we're going to be covering right here is international students, a challenging calm before an expected storm. So, Will, why do you think we chose that topic? What do you think that lead our audience in a little bit?
Sounds good. So recently, myself and a bunch of my colleagues from across Canada and our team, we've been researching statistics, and we think that these statistics are incredibly eye-opening because they tell us who's getting approved, who's getting refused, what the impact of COVID has been on various parts of our immigration system. So recently, my colleague Lou L.J. Danzin did a ATIP on study permits and the refusal rates during COVID and who is getting refused. And we saw from just a pure numbers perspective, a 13% drop in approval rate and somewhere between a 4th and a 5th drop in the number of study permits granted. So given COVID and given how much institutions are struggling right now with the lack of international tuition and the numbers, my prediction for the future is once this COVID pandemic, once the vaccinations happen and it's safe, and I know in BC, for example, schools are opening up for in-person classes in the fall, the numbers and the welcome mat will be placed back out. But to dissect what happened and where we're going, it's a fascinating topic. So that's why I'm here to share some of our findings with you.
Absolutely. So those of you who are tuned in and you're watching and you're wondering, what's this one about? You're so used to me just getting on and answering everybody's questions about everything immigration. Well, in these Immigration Nation episodes where I bring on real true experts, and I can call another lawyer an expert all I want to. They're not saying it, so the law societies can't care. but I can call someone an expert. And Will really is when it comes to the pathways of international students through study permit to postgrad, all the way through to PR. And that's why I brought him on here. So the questions today, if you want your question to be posted and answered, it needs to relate to the plight of international students. So if you've got some good questions about that, go ahead, post them, whether you're watching it on Facebook, whether it's the YouTube channel, whether maybe you're even over on Twitter watching via Periscope. Please go ahead, post your comments, and then we'll reach a stage within our presentation that will pull some of those up. But they need to be confined kind of to the world of international students for this particular episode. All right, so Will, as we're shifting over, COVID really changed the world. At least it's made a significant change right now. So why don't you start off by just explaining kind of where we were and what this impact of COVID has had on this whole process?
Yeah. Well, I think pre-COVID, international students and the numbers generated were a huge part of the billion-dollar industry that is international education, and also the major starting point for a lot of individual journeys to permanent residence. So I'm sure with your express entry expertise, many of the clients you saw were also former international students who had graduated, who had postgraduate work permits, got their 1 year of full-time work experience. But the study permit is often the so-called gatekeeper to this, right? And before the gates were relatively open, 60% approval rates, a lot of students coming in, especially increasingly from India and China at that time. And now we're seeing a drop, and now we're seeing increased refusal rates because of COVID. So it's been a different time to be a practitioner as well, advising clients in countries where refusal rates are very high and continuing to increase. But is it temporary? I think so.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, this world of social media and Facebook groups and online forums and WhatsApp groups, there was this massive push in the early days. And I shouldn't say early days, probably by the time, maybe 2-3 years into express entry, people started realizing that, my goodness, the human capital that's required to actually get an invitation to apply from outside of Canada is just well beyond my reach. So all of the overseas agents and everyone else peddling, the pathways to Canada, they really latched on to the study permit. So whether you were someone who was in the typical range, kind of your mid-20s or whatever, early 20s, looking to take a bachelor's degree in Canada, it's very quickly it stretched into 30 plus years old who knew they didn't have a pathway. And if they could just get a study permit, then they could follow exactly what you described. Postgrad, complete your studies, postgrad work permit, then apply and get those extra points for Canadian education. But like you've said, any program that's abused, then it seems like the government just turns the tap down. And don't even get me started with how many programs have been closed just because of really overuse or they're being used in ways in which they weren't originally designed to be. So yeah, initially it seemed like, hey, everybody was, spouting this is what you do, but the world has changed for sure.
I think the one thing I would add though is, in addition to abuse, it's actually almost a program that is perfect for, frankly, financial gain, right? Because you have the government making money via schools. You have Canada making money off schools. You have agents who peddle it making money. And again, another whole area that I also don't want to get started on is how we need to have some regulation of education consultants, because that is not a practice that is regulated right now, and that's very problematic, especially globally, where it came as a surprise to me talking to some schools how they pay their agents anywhere up to 33% of the student's tuition. If you think about that,
first year tuition, oh my goodness,
it could be, yes, yeah. So it was very commonly at 20%, 25%, but up to 33%. All that money is leaving the country.
Yeah.
Right. So there are some problems here that need to be looked at deeper, but it's something that the government still wants, and I think the key to COVID recovery will be bringing students back in, because if you're having Laurentian University, other universities shut down, other programs have challenges, a lot of them have pointed back to international students as the reason. And so when the borders open, I expect the students to come back in, and that's why the storm is coming for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And Will, it's not just obviously the private institutions. Our public institutions are bleeding. You know, I've got a good friend who's a professor here in the University of Lethbridge, and yeah, they rely heavily on international students when the federal, you know, the provincial funding just isn't what it used to be. And so now that they are, you know, they've lost the, you know, this substantial amounts of tuition to, you know, to feed into school budgets, it's a huge problem. So I know they've been advocating nonstop, you know, to try to get these international students in. We've seen changes with how immigration is allowing, you know, in, you know, specific situations, individuals, study permit holders to come in depending on how well the school is prepared. But yeah, this is, I agree with you. You know, there's a little bit of a moratorium right now, but the international students are not, like, this is a critical part, a critical component to our, you know, levels planning and just, you know, acquiring the actual candidates that are really well suited to immigrate to Canada. So it just makes sense.
But I think the other concern is, of the candidates that eventually come in, who's going to be sorted and selected for permanent residency, because there are also so many barriers on the way. Getting here, I mean, it's half the battle. And in some countries, frankly, there isn't a battle because refusal rates are at 80 and 90%. You know, these are mostly global South countries in Asia, Middle East, Africa, where the refusal rates are so high. But now, once you're here, all the rules and you know, the requirement to actively pursue studies, to maintain full-time status and be enrolled, all of the confusing rules around the postgraduate work permit, then there's a lot of room for individuals to be sorted out. So I almost feel, and I tell my clients this, that you're applying to what is essentially like a Harvard-like country, Canada. Whether or not you get selected and brought in is already part of the battle, but it doesn't end once you get into the school. You still have to really follow each of the steps. And those steps often are confusing and not well set out, to be very honest with you.
Now, Will, one of the things that we're really, you know, is a critical rationale for why I even do this is educating people. And there's a lot of misinformation that's spread out there. You hinted on something that I don't think many people understand. It's these refusal rates. So I just want to drill a little bit deeper into that. Can you share with the people that are listening what these statistics are showing you right now in terms of refusal rates globally? And when you talk about generally countries, can you kind of identify it so the people that are watching, you know, and they've got some agents saying, oh, here, you know, this is a great pathway. This is how you do it, blah, blah, blah. And they're coming from a country when they're almost doomed for failure before they even start.
Oh, for sure. And I see it all the time on agencies, on their websites, on boards stuck out of even shops in Canada where they say, you know, 90% approval rate. All of these are made up. So one thing, when you work with an agent, you always want to ask them, where are you getting this number from, right? This number, is it your internal number? Did you come up with it? Did you just randomly draw it out of the thin air? But our actual statistics show something very different. So I encourage you all to read my article that I've posted. I think, Mark, you're going to be sharing it a little bit with.
Well, why don't we just pop it up just quick for a second right now, Will? So what I want to do is I'm just going to flip over here, and you can see Vancouver Immigration Blog. This is Will's site. This is his blog that is really a significant source of information that you guys can trust. And you can see here within this, he has he's written a paper, 5 Things I Wish International Students Knew Before Applying for Canadian Study Permits. Google Vancouver Immigration Blog. I don't have the actual link in the description right now. I'll get it up there later. But go to Google Vancouver Immigration Blog, check out this article, and this will go into a little bit more depth about some of the things that we're talking about today.
Yeah. So we did a recent ATIP, and we only have January to November, so we're 1 month short on 2020. But in terms of approval rates, Canada's study permit historical rate was at about 69, 67, 66, 60 for the last 4 years. And in 2020, it went down to 47%. So that's a shocking statistic right there. In China, for example, you were in the high 80s, 88, 88, 87, 85. This year dropped to 75%. For India, which is probably where you see the biggest, and again, in the Indian international student market, especially in the Punjab, it's a very, very intense and competitive market. A lot of applicants. They make the majority of the cases. Their approval rates were historically in the 60s, 68, 65, 66, 64 in the last years prior to this year, and now it's at 43%.
Yep.
And you're seeing this. We also did a look at cases where refusal rates were above 70%, and we largely found that these are African, Middle Eastern, global South countries. So when you apply, one of the things that I always recommend is to do your research, and these stats are available. And I know, unfortunately, it's through data requests that sometimes lawyers have to do. But for example, I'm very transparent with my data. When I see a client from a certain country, especially if it's a country that I might not be as familiar with, this is my starting point. And I want to make sure that the clients know what they're getting into. If there's an 80% refusal rate and you're a mature student trying to do a midlife career change, what are the chances, right? And you have to enter this conversation realistically. And I think that that's unfortunately what a lot of agents and other individuals don't do when they try and sell their services is to be honest with their clients. And that's something I know both me and you value a lot in our work, is that honesty, right? To make sure we're being realistic with everyone.
And you talk about midlife transitions, right? You think, okay, what's midlife? 40? Well, yeah, that's obvious, but try 30, right? Try once you cross over that barrier of 30, and I don't know what the I don't know how the AI interprets this stuff, but, and we know that's a part of the decision-making is artificial intelligence right now. I don't know how they weight age of applicant overall, but even 30, you transition, you're already a little bit more up against the, up against the wall a little bit when you're trying to apply.
Absolutely. And I think COVID, it's interesting. And I don't know. I don't know if your change was during COVID, but mine was. It is a time when people are, at home wondering, like, should I still be doing what I'm doing, right? Like, people are in career paths where they worked downtown for their entire lives and in finance offices, and they're now like, I actually want to be a pastry chef, or I actually want to fly planes. Like, the number of clients that have come to me saying that they want to fly planes, do online businesses, run pastry shops, go back into the restaurant industry. Like, those are the clients that find me. And I think COVID has really pushed a lot of those changes too. Unfortunately, the government and the immigration system doesn't see it often the same way, and maybe is a little behind on some of these midlife career changes and are refusing applications on the basis of the purpose of study.
Actually, I'm going to pull a comment up here, the first little comment. So one of the things that we have the ability to do is to pull on some comments. So let's just see what Abhishek here. It's a little bit of a larger comment. I'm just going to adjust the size a little bit so that it fits a little better and stretch it out a bit more. Okay, so Abhishek, this is what he said. He said, I came to Toronto as a student in September 2018. So this is that big wave, right? Like everybody came. Everybody that possibly had any remote chance of applying did during this stretch. Received my right of permanent resident fee request. Hopefully soon the journey will be completed and we'll be able to start a new chapter in life stress-free. I think Abhishek points out something very, very important, and that's the fact that there is unbelievable stress for international students when you come, especially through this pandemic. You've got individuals who just, maybe they've been laid off. They were stressed over whether or not they were going to have enough work experience to qualify through the Canadian Experience class. All of these things were all just 2020 was awful for the international student.
Absolutely. And inside Canada, the rules kept changing like every week. Even now, I highlighted in the piece I wrote, but whether or not you can bring in a company family to help you settle in Canada or establish, as they say, two different sites on immigration have two very different explanations. So we're in a time where even getting accurate information from the government is a difficult challenge. Yeah. This is still a credit to all those in immigration who are working on this. It's not an easy time for them. They've been doing some amazing policy adjustments to keep up with all the changes. But I think Abhishek highlights the stress there. And I think one thing we forget in this conversation, and because I think the economic argument is so strong of, who's made, are the institutions benefiting? Is the Canadian economy benefiting? Is a student making more money than they did, when they were at their home country or something? But we forget the mental stress, the family separation, the mental health issues, the constant worry even of family members abroad. All of those have been worsened during COVID and factor in largely into the challenging experience of coming to Canada as a student and the pathway to permanent residence.
Yeah. Will, one of the things is people are trying to find these, they're trying to get into the funnel. And we talked about, these people that are kind of at midlife doing a career shift and they think, hey, I'll go to school in Canada. And they may even legitimately think, I'm going to go to school. I actually don't want to become a permanent resident. I'm going to take that education, go back. It's going to help me transition, pursue different paths. And then they're faced with the realities of this 40% approval rate, that is, and even worse in some of those other countries that you've talked about. I'll show you a question that I get, and I'm sure you get more than anything else. It's this one right here by I Am the Postman. And he says here, can you apply for a student visa and express entry at the same time? So this question I get so frequently. I've got my own thoughts on, the short answer is, of course, yes, you can. But the real question is, like, what impact does having an express entry profile in the queue actually have on the study permit, assessment in and of itself? What's your thoughts on that?
I think either we've had a conversation on this or I've read something you've written on this, but it's been absolutely on point, and I agree with you. It's also shocking how much, and this goes back to your conversation on artificial intelligence, but how much more this public space and domain, the websites, the forums are being accessible to officers. So I've heard of cases, and I've seen people come in the door where it's because of something they wrote on a forum or on LinkedIn that they were applying for express entry, or that they create a profile that then gets inputted into the assessment of the student visa and student permit, and leads to a procedural fairness issue or a refusal. I'm seeing that increasing in the areas that I'm working with, that sort of cross pollination of information that's available that the individual knows themselves, so there's no procedural fairness requirement to actually give them an opportunity to respond. You posted that on LinkedIn, you posted that on Facebook, you wrote an article saying you want to start a life in Canada and move there permanently. So that's one element. The other one is just dual intention. It's an important concept. It's in the law, but the interpretation and the application of it has been all over the map. And I think way too many agents, and frankly, even really qualified consultants and lawyers, sometimes push dual intention when that pathway isn't available. So I think the key thing is to meet Mark and get that express entry assessment and figure out where you're at in the process, whether you can maybe just focus on express entry first and then get your study permit. Or if you need those points from the Canadian studies, maybe to figure out to focus on the study permit first and then come here and focus on that piece. So the timing is so important. I don't think people recognize how important that timing is. Those are my thoughts. Sorry
those are great thoughts, Will. And one thing that I tell people, if they have not yet submitted a profile, we assess, we look at it and we say, okay, how close are you? Like, do we legitimately think you'll have a chance of getting an ITA? And if the answer is no, then I strongly advise them not to submit a profile at all. Don't. If you're going to look at studying in Canada, then put all your effort and weight into it. And if it gets refused, well, you're no worse off for the purposes of express entry. And then you don't even open up an avenue for some other, when they're balancing and they're weighing the pros and cons of approving, that assessment, those pull factors and things like that are not going to, that just isn't going to be a factor, at least when you're already at, 30 plus years of age. So that's often the discussions that I have. And you can see here, we've got one other person, a niece here, who says, and this is one where I will, actually, I don't know if I have the bell. Let's see, I'll pull it up here. So I'll ring this bell because the answer for you, I'm not going to give it to you because you've got to book a consultation. We can't tell you one way or another. But generally speaking, we do have the ability here, as I'm flipping between my screens, we do have the ability to answer this generally. But he says, what do you suggest for someone who is 40 plus for studying and getting the route to PR? I'm observing a big number of refusals last year. A niece, I'm assuming a niece is probably Asia Pacific there for sure. But, we've already talked about this, I think, Will, to a large extent. I think there's, you could try to attribute a percentage of, or a chance. I would probably give anyone that's 40 plus applying for a study permit, I'll give you about a 20% chance in the best, in maybe the best of circumstances. But what are your thoughts? Obviously it depends on the country you're coming from, but what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, the challenge is now, well, first of all, one thing I highlight this in my piece as well, the refusal reasons are very, very arbitrary, right? Yep. So, and I say this to any applicant or student, I could probably find a reason to approve you and find a reason to refuse you. And that's why I kin it to Harvard. You could be the most perfect candidate on paper, have
Mhm.
a master's and top of your, in your school, and now years later you're a professional in your industry and you want to get a PhD. I can still say, it doesn't make sense why you're not studying comparable programs in your home country. I found one here, or even I don't even have to find one. I can just refuse you and then let you go to court and waste your money
Yeah.
in a year
Yeah.
to fight it. Unfortunately, that's what I mean, right now the courts are kind of facilitating this process because it takes so long to get a matter to judicial review, right? So it's, a year and a half later, people's plans change. Again, I just think that the bigger picture is you have to figure out what pathways are actually open to you. And if express entry is age discriminatory, which we know it is, are you looking at a provincial nomination program? Are you realistically looking at a province where there is a possibility of getting a job after you graduate your program? Because you're not going to get any closer after just doing one level of studies if your age is already
Yes.
losing you hundreds of points. So
Absolutely. You have to do
yeah,
those, even if you go through school, you go do all of those levels. The wild card now, Will, is this crazy draw 176, right? Where
yeah.
people with 75 CRS points received an ITA. And what does that mean? And is there possibility of that happening again? We don't know. But
Exactly.
yeah, but there's lots of factors to look at. This individual, TNT Mom, asks an interesting question. So what's the approval rate for Jamaica? So when people are asking these kinds of questions, like where can they go to actually get that data? Now you're never going to get real time. It's going to be, it's always going to be a year or so removed. But if someone, like, do you have that posted on your page, on your blog, or is it like, how would people, other than doing like we do, ATIP requests, refusal rates for certain country or something, like,
Yeah.
do you have a quick response to that, or like not how many, what the percentage is?
Yeah,
I know
it's
you don't have that at your fingertips, but when you're looking for those, what kind of a process do you go through?
I do access information requests and also direct data requests from IRCC, which they tend to provide those. One of them costs $100, and you actually directly ask from the data team there. And the other one, sorry, that was my email. I'm actually looking it up as we speak.
Yeah.
And the other one is to do an ATIP request, which could take a little bit longer, but you can get the stats on that. I can pull it up probably pretty quickly within our conversation now.
Sure.
Jamaica.
Okay. Well, we'll leave that. Yeah.
Okay, we're
Yeah.
we're at 27%, so closer to that 20%. That 27%. So I think there were 345 applications approved and 936 refused for Jamaica.
So you're saying
Japan's
30,
98% in case approval, in case one. So 27% approval rate. Sorry, 27% approval rate. 345 applications were approved. 936 were refused. January to November 2020.
There you go. So you can see. So TNT Mom, you've got an uphill battle, and those are overall statistics for that country. So thanks, Will. That's really cool. So you can see why I brought him on, you guys. This is why, if you have questions about anything related to international students, and really anything, I might do express entry, but I know Will does as well. And at the end of the day, go and click on that link. And if you need assistance, book a consult. It'll be well worth your time. All right. Okay. So let's transition a little bit, Will. Let's just talk about kind of the world that we're looking at right now. So when the pandemic hit, what impact did it have on students that were in Canada right now? Like, what were the things that you saw?
Well, the immediate one would be school shutting down and the virtual studies, which the government has made several changes that have facilitated the ability to still get postgraduate work permits, or if students were getting extensions to facilitate those, even if their documents were missing. Although I note that I have several clients and heard way too many stories of international students who are still waiting for extensions. Their applications are being bounced around various visas in Canada offices waiting to be processed, and that's had a huge negative impact on them. But overall, I think it's for international students, a lot of it was very isolating, stuck at home doing doing virtual studies, a lot of financial issues as well. And those, I think there's going to be a general silence around these, because obviously to stay in Canada as a temporary resident, you have to show that you have your ability to pay funds. But as those sources of funds diminished globally, the biggest impact would be on something like an international student here, and a lot of calls for students to return, but students here saying, I don't want to go back. A lot of borrowing of money, and that all of that has been really, I believe, stressful. Going back to Abhishek's word, stressful on international students. But
and
the
we're
other thing
seeing
has
more.
been,
And I was going to say, Will, and we're seeing more students applying for the destitute student work permits, right?
yeah,
Like those students who are trying to find pathways to support themselves, and because of the pandemic, those funds that they were relying upon that are just they've just been depleted, and we look at those who even are in the final stages who've had confirmations of permanent residence issued but unable to travel, and then they're stuck for
exactly.
a year, and they've quit their jobs, they've sold their homes, they pulled their kids out of school, and over this year they've just been depleting those funds, just trying to survive, waiting for the borders to open. So these are
Absolutely.
realities for sure.
Absolutely. And same with, I've seen an increase in temporary resident permit clients coming to see me for TRPs to try and keep them in Canada, for restorations for students who have lost status, even though, again, IRCC has had a wonderful restoration policy, but there's individuals who fell out of that or who are having issues before that. And it's an interesting time. I mean, again, postgraduate work permit is a big, that's sort of the link between the areas that I'm really focusing on now and you're focusing on. But, there are still refusals or students in the same class get different durations on the permit, depending on the officer reviews the studies. And now with COVID and all the virtual studies, it's becoming a little bit more confusing to figure out what was in, what was out, what was part-time, and when did it occur? Was it part of COVID? Was it earlier? So it's been I think it's been really stressful on students, and I have to call that out and name it out for those who are my clients, because they have to pay us to also help them through these situations. Another layer of stress. So.
And the reality with how the government is treating international students that were admitted and are taking classes online, right? We know that they have said that they're willing to consider granting credit for those studies that have been taken outside because of the barriers and the travel restrictions in COVID. But at this stage, they've not shown a willingness to grant the CRS points for that education unless the person's actually been in Canada. So there's 15, 30 points that they may not get. They might be able to eventually apply for their postgrad, but if more than 50% of the studies have been taken, online outside of Canada, there hasn't been that willingness, at least from IRCC, to open that door up. Yeah. Although for postgrad students in Canada who were kind of hosed by, this pandemic and the closures, they did extend that public policy, right? So maybe you can talk just a little bit about that, Will, and then we'll shift back.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think the one thing about the public policy that I would have done a little bit differently, and again, I think we're an open space for criticism and praise when it's due, but they probably should have made it so that it was renewable up to the 18 months rather than just say based on passport validity, because the number one challenge that people have had during COVID, when international offices are closed, when countries are struggling at home with COVID, is the passport offices, right? Yeah. So you have a lot of. I just recently did a consultation with someone who only had a couple months left on their passport, but they qualify for this, but they're only able to get a couple months. And what does that mean in the context of their ability to stay? So it has had a disproportionate impact. But overall, I think I completely agree with you for the express entry point. I think that's another one where it's almost like they've aligned the front end of the student end, but the back end of the ministerial instructions for express entry may need to be tinkered or a temporary public policy added to facilitate that, because I think it's not a good overall policy. And again, granted, a lot of international students don't want to actually stay in Canada permanently. I know that it might be surprising for some, but I do get a lot of clients who genuinely say that they want to study here and then go back and take their talents there. And that's what, there's an export model for Canadian studies too. And that's what the government wants. But for those that are here and see that bottleneck and see that all the alternatives are closing as well, it's a stressful time. So,
and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So you've got someone who's been given advice by an agent: come get your study permit, come to Canada, and your ticket's made. And it's not just that agent. our schools, or even our
Mm-hmm.
government itself is
Yeah.
highlighting that one of the advantages to come and, taking your education here, spending your hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever it ultimately ends up being, to get a 4-year degree, and we'll have a pathway to permanent residence for you. So what are your comments, or what are your remarks or response to that, Will?
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
real time, like with the world we see right now, because although the government has expanded, you look, 108,000 this year's the target for essentially express entry, 80,000 PNPs. Like there are only so many spots that are available each year, and people are going to time out, right? They're, post
Mm-hmm.
grads, they can't be extended through the traditional route
Yeah.
unless you switch categories. Like, what are your thoughts on
Mm-hmm.
that? What would you say to international students who are at the beginning
Yeah.
stages, thinking about coming to Canada now in light of
Mm-hmm.
everything that we've seen?
That's a difficult
You
question
bet it
question to
is,
answer
man.
right now.
We're
We're faced with
stretching the
difficult
expert
questions.
here now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, right now, my advice to most students is to just there. It's a bit of a wait and see period until the COVID travel restrictions. So it's an anomaly now. But even in the past years, I was presenting, and I believe, and this is where I have to go and get updated statistics. But the
Yep.
time I was presenting, I think it was 2019. It's my stats were about only 25% of international students were actually being facilitated to go into the express entry. I don't know if that's changed or around the
Yep.
same, but that's not a large portion. That means that most of the international students aren't ever becoming permanent residents in Canada. Is it by choice? Is it not by choice? I mean, I've seen both in my practice,
Yep.
right? Something comes up overseas, suddenly their plans change. But there are also many who are 1 or 2 or a few points short, and then they no longer have a pathway, right?
Yep.
And to go back on, jump on my critic side and put my critic hat back on, maybe that could have been a way to, this pandemic and the effects it's had on international students. The government may have been better suited to split those 27,000 that they invited into different portions and say, you know what, we want international students, give you some time to get your paperwork together. We want to select you specifically, given all that you've been through. They decided to go for the one-shot thing, and again, there's benefits to that. You've written about some of the benefits of that, and I completely agree with you. A low score doesn't represent, how you are, whether you're suitable or not to be a permanent resident in Canada. I completely think that we were basing our stats on a lot of outdated, purely economic arguments, and some of those need to be rethinked. But I think that there could have been a more meaningful step to be like international students who have participated in COVID recovery, have done work in some important areas. For example, service sector, caregivers, all the ones who had to help out during the pandemic. There must be a way to support them for permanent residency. And I hope the government does. That's the next step.
Yeah. That's really what we're watching, right? We had a PNP draw recently, and usually the PNP always followed with another CEC. We haven't seen it yet. What ultimately they're going to do, I don't think they're done well. And if you look at the numbers, obviously after this draw happened, everybody flooded back in to refill the coffers, right? The people that didn't realize that they had a chance are all piling in as fast as they can. And the bottleneck that's limiting that is the ability to get a language test, or an ability to get your ECA, or those kinds of things are the only real limiting factor preventing people from coming in, because 1 year skilled work experience at a skill level B, and really, if you take it down to its bare bones, a CLB 5, that's a pretty low bar. So it'll be interesting to see what the government actually does. We've had lots of ongoing discussions with them, with the Canadian Bar Association and our national executive. And I just wrapped up my meetings with with immigration today, us representatives, and there was a lot of interesting things discussed. But ultimately, no one knows. At least none of us in the public know what the government is going to do. And in fact, when that draw hit, even the PNPs didn't know how low that was going to dip. And then you look at these postgrad students on open work permits. For many of them, there are no pathways through the PNPs. Like there's a lot of provincial nominee programs they just simply don't have access to. Even in Alberta, unless your program of study is related to the work experience you have, you're not eligible. So you're right. The 25% doesn't surprise me. I suspect there'll be a little bit of an edging upward just because of this large draw. But still, you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of international students that I speak to of late are having trouble advocating for themselves in these workspaces too, right? And I think COVID is also, in some senses, also increased that, maybe call it protectionism or nationalism or like
Yeah.
concern, and of course the economic, like, is this worker going to stay? What are their roots? I actually just I was just quoted in a new Canadian media piece today about that discrimination in hiring of foreign students, foreign graduates, right? So again, Abhishek's comments on like the stressful process, I just like from the beginning. In fact, the beginning might even be easiest because oftentimes students don't know what's going on because someone's taking care of it for them. And that's, again, in my piece, something I said: the earlier you recognize what's going on yourself, the better it is for the overall process, right? And not just letting things happen to you and then realizing at the time when your permit is expired and immigration sends you a letter saying you should leave Canada, where it starts kicking in. Like, go speak
Yeah.
to Mark, get that PR
Yeah.
pathway figured
Yeah.
out, right? And if it involves students and the study permit, talk to me. Maybe we'll figure out a pathway.
Absolutely.
Like,
And
get it done
Will,
early, right? And,
based on the comments that I've been watching here, Will, we've kind of opened up Pandora's box. So what I recommend, so we've got, what's the rate for Jamaica? So, what I recommend is you might want to consider just maybe posting it on your blog. If you do have those statistics, can you make those available on the blog post? Is there any restrictions on doing that?
I will speak to my colleague LJ, and maybe LJ and I will do a follow up on this particular topic.
Yeah.
He did the ATIP request, so as far as professional courtesy, taking
Absolutely.
someone else's information and
so I'll
sharing
show you.
it.
So what's the rate for Nigeria? Okay, check this
Wow.
out. This is my favorite here. Okay, how about Brazil?
For mid-30s.
How about Mexico and the U.S.? You can see. So there's a very, very strong interest in people, and this is powerful, right? This is. What's the approval rate for Cameroon? How about Zimbabwe? Will? So you can see all these people. We got another Cameroon, right? So Saudi Arabia, Sri Lanka. So there's definitely a demand for it, my friend. So if you are able to. The first thing I'm actually gonna shift back here because we have one other question that leads into all of these, and it's this one. Okay, so I live in France and I've just been refused a study permit under Section 216. Can you help in any way to reapply? So this is one of the most difficult situations. Your first kick at the can is often the best, and when you have a prior refusal, there's a whole host of things that you go through in order to determine whether or not it's worth applying or not. The link below, and I don't want to open up, work, Will, that's, that maybe you might be able to help or maybe not, but Will's consult link is below in the description. This is 100% something that you would need to consult an immigration lawyer about because there may be avenues through different pathways, maybe just something simple that you could have adjusted or corrected. But it may be something that's a lot more, even systemic, and you need to consider things like, judicial reviews and things like that. But at this stage, this is a question we get a lot. And I just encourage all of you to click on the link to Will's site and connect with him. And paid consults, folks. Will's given his free time here, but when you connect in, expect to pay him for his time. All right.
Thank you, Mark. I do want to give one tidbit though, and just
please.
I wrote this in my piece, but there's nothing rational about R216. There's nothing rational about it, right? For example, one of the R216 factors they look at is a lack of travel history. And I mean, Raj Sharma has said it good too: no travel history, no visa, no visa, no travel history. But multiple courts have said this cannot be a reason for refusal. Yet it continues to show up on refusal letters. For me, that's like very blatantly saying, well, we don't care what the court says, we're just going to refuse anyways. But that, something like that. Or even recently, right now I'm working on a case from a client from Dubai who got refused to Canada on 216 for family ties in Canada. Guess how many family members he has in Canada, and how many family members are coming with him to Canada?
Yeah, he's probably has like
0.
maybe. Oh, none. 0. I was going to say maybe
0.
1 in Canada. Oh, that's awesome.
No,
okay.
No one. No, his whole family's there. They established there. He has no family here. He's coming with nobody, but he's refused for family ties. So
clearly they're checking the boxes off so fast to get the refusals out so they can meet their quotas that yeah, those
Yeah.
errors happen. So Will, in those circumstances, and I know we didn't want to dive into what to do when your study permit's refused, but a lot of people do ask that. We're going to see it more and more and more.
Yeah.
So like when you get someone who comes to you, and like I said, maybe you can just kind of summarize high level,
Yeah.
like how do you
Absolutely.
approach something like that?
So it's pretty much a 3-part test: reconsider, reapply, judicial review. So those that's the way I high level it out for those three. Depending on whether it's, and again, you need the GCMS notes, which again, we're gonna open up another Pandora's box.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
getting the
yeah.
reasons for refusal
Yeah.
right now, everyone's being delayed 60, 90, however many days. So by the time you get those reasons, you're already out of your window for judicial review. So
Yeah.
one of the things I've been doing a lot more now recently is doing a judicial review. And I know, the courts don't want to be backlogged, and I'm not trying to backlog them, but the way the system is, because we don't have the reasons, we need to
Yep.
file to get reasons. And then
Yep.
once we get the reasons based on what the officer's written, which again, I think international students don't know that what's in that standard form letter is only part of the reasons. What's in the GCMS notes is very, very important because that's read into the reasons. Once you look at that, you can determine whether it's a factual thing that can just be corrected, you actually had better evidence that wasn't submitted, or if it's just a legal issue that you can only resolve, a mixed fact and law issue that you can only resolve through judicial review, and let's take it to that process. So I go through all of this in the consultation with myself, but that's a very important question. And agents abroad and those who don't have law licenses and don't practice in this area will just constantly say reapply, kick until you make it, reconsider on a plea. A lot of those strategies are not well thought out, to be very honest. And I think we need to.
Exactly. And Will, that's the thing that frustrates me is when these agents, oftentimes if they've done something poorly within the context of your application, and I'm talking to you people who are watching this, you hire someone to assist you and they just do a crappy job of submitting the application. They don't put in near the evidence they should, and then it gets refused. Well, the last thing in the world they want to do is hand it over to a lawyer who points out all of the missing pieces and how incompetent they were when they originally filed that original application that now potentially has destroyed your opportunity of coming to Canada ever. Right. And so often it's so important to educate people that there are avenues, and that's why it's so important to connect with someone like Will. And so you take Camilla here, right? This is the thing, Will. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us. TNT Mama says thanks. Like, this is why we do this, right? We do this to try to educate people, to help them. And when we say click on the link below, book a consult with Will, there's a reason for it, you guys. And if you're looking to try to actually get information that you can rely upon, and the answer may be, well, you're just kind of screwed. There's nothing really that we can do. You're 50 years old. You have no ties to your home country. I've had no job for 4 years. And now you want to go to study in Canada. And you've got some rich, friend in Canada that's saying they're going to support you with your, with your funds. You're probably not going to have a chance. But in that consultation, you actually get an answer that you can rely on and then organize your life. And if Canada isn't an option, Will isn't going to spin you some yarn just to get or work, right? He's going to give you advice that you can actually rely on. And that happens with me all the time, Will, when people are asking about my eligibility for express entry. I say, look, you just don't got a shot. Like, you don't right now. And so you're better off focusing on your country, improving your position there, or exploring other options that are out there in the globe.
Yeah. And as I was mentioning earlier, agents are being paid oftentimes by the school to place you, and if not by that school, by another school. Their vested interest in getting paid. My vested interest is making sure you get the best Canadian immigration and refugee law advice, and that your family is safe, healthy, and happy at the end of the day. And sometimes Canada might have to be your destination 2 or destination 3 after a first destination. Or maybe there's a faster way through express entry that you haven't thought about, right? Go see Mark because he's got the pathway there. Don't waste the money because the agent says you need to go to this school and be a full-time student and pay $60,000 in tuition. Maybe there's a better way. Look at the alternatives. My article covers a lot of this, but I think what's important is working with someone who actually knows what the law is, knows what the rules and policies are, and works directly with you. There's too much indirect advice in this field. And Mark, you know this best. You've adjusted your model so you're working directly with clients. I'm doing the exact same thing because I just can't trust someone who is located abroad with no knowledge of what's going on here to give advice through me or with me, right?
Right. And I'm glad you pointed that out, Will, because often that's what happens. The consultant or even the lawyer potentially have some agent overseas that is the front, and you may not even have an opportunity to talk to the person that's supposedly your authorized representative. Do not trust this situation. And Will pointed out earlier, just not only how there's this real conflict of interest through the use of education agents, because they get paid by ensuring that you're connected to a school, whether or not they, basically they're going to take you down all kinds of different paths that may not be in your best interest. But you have to realize that if there is someone that's actually representing you, you need to have contact with them. And if you don't, do not trust them. Do not. Your life is literally in their hands.
Agreed.
Yeah. And as I look through this, Will, like there are, when I pull up these comments,
okay.
It is just, there's so many,
all the different countries. I want to state that the government, like this, if this information is publicly available, access to information, it should be available in a public site. I think they are doing it, but they don't often break it down by country citizenship, which has been the stuff that we've been requesting now, which is why we're getting data that actually is disaggregated onto these really important factors: what countries are approving, what countries are refusing. And but again, I want to put one last warning flag.
Yes.
Approval rates differ case and client by client, right? So even if it's like a 40% approval rate, you might have facts and we can build a case that is got a higher percentage than that. But as a lawyer, I can't give you a percentage because I do not know, because I haven't reviewed your files and paperwork. Right. So one of the things I think sometimes clients are a little too eager to know is, what is your approval rate before they've passed on any documentation, before I even know a single fact of their case. It's like, what is your approval rate? And that question is going to open you up to get exploited by someone who makes up an approval rate.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be wary. You have to be careful. All right. So we've had a chance to talk about a lot of different things here, Will. And, as far as the future, we've talked about just the fact that there's a lot of people right in Canada right now. There's transitions, questions about transitioning to PR and whether there's spots, people educating themselves, actually asking the questions and making sure that they demand the answers that they need. We're just about closing up on our time here for our live stream today. And we appreciate everybody who's posted questions. There's a lot of questions that we did not get to, just for the simple reason that, well, there's a limited amount of time. Some were not related to our topic. Others were lengthy ones that just wouldn't literally fit on the screen. Remember, you can book consults below and get those questions answered with Will Tao, immigration lawyer. Will is based in Vancouver. And I'm obviously in Alberta, but anything related to this topic, you have access to people that can help you. And hopefully this was helpful. Will, did you have any last kind of minute things that you wanted to address before we drift off? I know that we had a pretty big area that we were trying to cover here, but are there any specific things that you really want to make sure that the listeners pay attention to before we wrap things up?
Yeah. So I'm actually based in Burnaby now, just to be really specific about it. No, it's all good.
He's in Burnaby. Okay.
So Burnaby, home of Joe Sakic, some good hockey players, and Michael Bublé, for those of you who are music fans, not too far away from home. But in terms of the last thing I would say is that I think all of you are listening, and all of Mark Holthe's listeners and those who are following, you are doing the right thing by investing your time into the process and not just treating this as an end result. And if there's anything Mark and I can do from our end, from our professional end, that's the reason I do build work, is to get the lessons learned and figure out what's wrong with the system so I can research and improve it. Mark is on the front lines of this with his role with the CBA National, going to meetings with the government. I'm also trying to do consultations and attend different policy meetings and do talks on it. All of this contributes to a better system and a better Canada and a better immigration process for those who are involved. And so I just want to commend everyone for listening and investing in this process with us and being part of it, because it's not just us getting you to the end destination. It's how we get there and do it in the right way. And I think that hopefully we can help you with that process moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks, Will. And just one last plug. I'm just going to flip back here and show you guys. This is the Vancouver Immigration blog. This is Will's developed this. It's a wonderful resource of information. You have to read this post, 5 things I wish international students knew before applying for Canadian study permits. And that's really where you do the work. You invest the time in the beginning before you transition to choosing an agent or whatever it might be. You educate yourself, you'll protect yourself, and you'll be able to make the right decisions. So Mr. Tao, thank you so much for joining me today. This was awesome. It was a pleasure having you here, joining me on Immigration Nation, and all the best, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And all the best to you and your family, staying safe. And hopefully this COVID thing can be a past tense soon. But
yeah, I think we're all
best to all your listeners and their family as well, because I know it's a stressful time, like going back to the word stressful, but stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you.
Thank you, Will. All right. See you guys. We'll be back again next week, 3 p.m. Ravi Jain is joining me, and we're going to have some more interesting discussions. So 3 p.m., we're going to try to do this more frequently. But yeah, 3 p.m. next week, and I look forward to connecting with everybody. See you later.